What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm honored to have back on the show once again podcast regular, United Church minister turned whistleblower, Canadian hero, humanitarian, loving father, published writer and author, public speaker and podcaster, documentary filmmaker, Nobel Peace Prize nominee, co-founder of the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State, righteous soul, and eagle-strong voice, Kevin Annett. A little bit about Kevin if you've missed any of his incredible episodes on this channel, or if you are new here, as well as a sneak peek of what we will be talking about today. Born in Edmonton, Canada, Kevin emerged not as a mere observer of injustice, but as a relentless force against it. A former United Church minister whose whistleblowing on the horrors of Canada's residential school system has endured for over 3 decades, transforming personal peril into a beacon of empowerment for the oppressed. Kevin's journey began in the quiet pursuit of faith and community service. Educated at the University of British Columbia and ordained as a minister in the United Church of Canada, he initially sought to bridge divides in a fractured society. While serving as a pastor in Port Alberni, British Columbia, Kevin stumbled upon a nightmare concealed in plain sight. Survivor testimonies revealing systemic abuse, torture, murder, and cultural genocide inflicted upon Indigenous children in church-run residential schools. These institutions, operated jointly by the Canadian government and churches, including the United Church, Roman Catholic, and Anglican denominations, were sites of unimaginable cruelty, hiding the evidence of a deliberate campaign to erase Indigenous identities. Refusing to avert his gaze, Kevin became a whistleblower in 1995, publicly exposing the complicity of his own church and the state in these atrocities. The cost was immediate and profound. Defrocked from his ministry, smeared in media campaigns, and subjected to threats that forced him into exile, he lost his livelihood, family stability, and his place in society. Yet, in the face of this onslaught, Kevin's resolve only hardened. Today, Kevin is coming on the show for a much-needed breath of fresh air conversation and moment of grounding. With all the heaviness of trauma and the joy of validation circulating the news internet and our hearts regarding the new Epstein revelations, emotions are high and many survivors and people are struggling with balancing both the gratitude and excitement of this information being seen by a majority audience and the destabilization of contending with actually being seen as a survivor, as well as seeing all the horrors populate every social media feed and large account as if it were entertainment or a Hollywood movie. Kevin is going to spend some time grounding us, talking about topics we can all get behind and relate to and need right now, such as how to endure, what we can do now that the Epstein files are out and this information can no longer be called conspiracy, the act of forgiveness, and of course, how to continue to have hope through it all. No one is better at giving hope than Kevin, and my hope for all of you is that this episode will help you breathe easier and feel empowered and clear instead of exhausted and overstimulated. What makes Kevin's testimony truly awe-inspiring is not merely the truths he's unearthed, but the hope he instills in survivors worldwide. Through his podcast, public speaking, books, and tireless advocacy, he has empowered survivors worldwide, encouraging them to reclaim their narratives and pursue justice on their own terms. Survivors, once silenced by trauma and systemic denial, find in him a model of endurance, a man who, despite decades of isolation and danger, continues to stand as Eagle Strong Voice, a name bestowed on him by Indigenous elders. His journey proves that one individual's testimony, forged in the fires of adversity, can shatter empires of lies and inspire a global movement toward healing and sovereignty. In an era where truth is often buried deeper than the graves he helped uncover, Kevin remains a living testament to the power of unwavering courage. His life whispers to every survivor, "Your story matters. Your pain will not be in vain. And together we can rise from the ashes to forge a world of genuine reconciliation." So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming back today's guest of honor, voice for the voiceless, relentless victim and survivor advocate, passionate purveyor of truth, content creator, human rights activist, absolute warrior, and a man whose actions always speak louder than any words, the one, the only, Kevin Annett. Kevin, it is so good to have you back today. Thank you for joining us for another episode.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Emma.
I'm really happy to have you. I think there's so much heaviness, and you've been sort of on the front lines talking about both aspects of disclosure. You always have been. You've always seemed to find the light in the darkness, and you've never stopped seeking the darkness despite how heavy it gets, and you're so good at removing it. So I'm really excited to sort of talk about that today and what we can do about being in the darkness as a society. But before we do that, wanted to catch up with you and see how you're doing and allow you to share any updates that are going on in your own life.
Well, there's a lot, but one I want to flag for everyone right away in America is that I'll be on speaking tour in the Midwest and East, starting in the first week in March. And we're first weekend, March 6th and 7th, we'll be in the Midwest and then heading east into Pennsylvania, New York, then down south. And what's really exciting about this, it isn't simply a speaking tour, it's linking up with people who are acting on that Declaration of Independence that came out on January 20th. That groups of people all over America, actually in 22 states, they've signed a document saying, we're declaring independence from the Trump regime, we're not obeying executive orders, we're not going to pay federal taxes, we're saying no to this tyranny. And these are both Democrats, Republicans, and unaligned people. They're just realizing that there's something striking at the heart of the American soul here. And we need to do more than just talk. So they're taking that action. I'll be fortunate to be working with a lot of these people on the ground, getting people to take back power in their own communities. And that's really a kind of empowerment that any survivor knows about, is essential as oxygen. That you need that sense that we are not just healing, but transforming the situation so we can stop these crimes once and for all. So that's kind of my big news right now, heading into March, almost.
That's exciting. If there's people listening that live in those areas, that maybe live somewhere that you're not already speaking and want to help you arrange a speaking engagement, what's the best way they can get a hold of you?
Well, I think you're posting my email, angelfire101@protonmail.com. And we can put you in touch actually with these. They're called constitutional assemblies. And 12 or more people do exactly what happened in 1776. Start writing up their own constitutions, how to govern their own communities. Because for one thing, I mean, the country is so big and unwieldy now that people have to have that taste of direct democracy in their own community in order to know what the promise of America is really all about. We have to govern ourselves. The title of my latest book, Governing Ourselves Spiritually, Politically, and Personally.
Do you have any other books that you'd recommend from your collection to either have to do with that or even the topics that we're going to be talking about today that you want to recommend?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the basic ones. And that's been a lot in the news recently and on my Sean Atwood interviews, talking about the book I wrote about the Vatican crimes, Dethroning a Rogue Power. And also our common law training manual and whistleblower manual. Those are, as we've talked about before on the show, pretty indispensable handbooks for how to not just dabble our toes in the struggle, but commit our life, to bring about real fundamental change.
And what's been the response from the last time we had you on, you were announcing that the new Declaration of Independence was going to be announced, that there was going to be a sort of global event in a sense, especially here in the United States, Canada, of people really taking a stand. Do you want to update us on what happened that day that you guys did that?
Well, it wasn't just the initiative it's called the National Council of Constitutional Assemblies. They've been working for years off the radar. And they don't really have an internet presence deliberately because they don't want the thing sabotaged. They don't want false versions of what they're doing put out. They're working on in the communities directly, kind of hands-on with people. But on the same day, in January 20th, there was actually a national shutdown. A lot of people, it was called Free America. And they didn't go to work. They didn't go to the stores. They just stayed home as a protest. But they said this is not just a protest. It's kind of an ongoing civil disobedience against the system on every level, because it's, as we all know from our own daily lives, it's becoming completely tyrannical. And we're drawing a line in the sand very much. And so it's an ongoing thing. It isn't just one event or anything. It's something that everyone has to take responsibility for if it's to work.
Absolutely. And then to compile that, now we have the Epstein files that have just been sprung on us. We've been sort of demanding some transparency, and it's just been this ongoing lingering of the government just covering stuff up, making excuses. And then all of a sudden, without warning, 3 million pages are just dumped. And a lot of it, too, really validates the things that you've been saying all along, that people have either been totally on board with or haven't been able to wrap their minds around, because it talks about the abuse of these people in power and what they're capable of. What were your thoughts whenever that came out? And how did you sort of navigate your own validation through that? Did that help validate what you were doing, or did it sort of...
Oh, yeah. It's validating the fact that, the power is not only inherently corrupt, but I mean, when you see those examples, it's a kind of a vague reminder of the Nixon years, where, right now the assistant attorney general is Trump's former defense lawyer, right? So he puts in his own lawyer, and he's after 3.5 million pages are released of this evidence, the guy actually says, we see nothing to prosecute. And it's kind of like the whole secret government system that got set up under Nixon and then beyond. They know they're not accountable. They know they don't have to answer to anyone but themselves. And then the question then becomes, well, what are we going to do about it? And in a way, to focus on Epstein all the time is the classic diversion, where everyone hates this one guy, rather than understanding what's the system that produced it, how do they get away with it continually, how are we all complicit in that? And so that kind of leads to something that I know we were going to talk about today, which is this thing of forgiveness, which is, at first glance, it's not just some abstract issue, because it's right at the heart of why people feel it difficult to take action. Because it has to do with the way we're conditioned, not only at birth, but our culture for thousands of years has rested on this simple idea: people in power are virtuous, and that if you rebel against them or question them, you're a bad person. And so this plays out in counseling, as any survivor knows. One of the first things the counselor will say to you, well, you've got to move on. You can't hold on to it. You've got to forgive and forget. Otherwise, you're crippling yourselves. And in the article, I go into detail of how it's a fallacy, because on the ground, working with people for many years, not only in a counseling capacity, but alongside them as an activist and as a researcher and everything, you find exactly the opposite is true. And I gave the example of my friend Harry Wilson, who was a Native man who went through these tortures at a very young age in these Indian school death camps. And he was the one most able to talk. And what he would say all the time was, I'll never forgive them for what they did to me. And what he had, compared to most of the other people in the healing circle, he wasn't crushed. He was determined. He wasn't afraid of his own anger. And he didn't feel some moral need to forgive his oppressor, right? He said, no, I'm never going to forgive them. So he held on to something in himself that's really essential, and that is our ability to talk about what happened to us and name the names. In counseling, that's exactly what they discourage people from doing, and that's poisonous, because the one thing we can't let go of is the ability to tell our own story, tell the truth of what happened. I mean, it's hard enough to recover those memories often, but when you do recover it, first thing you hear from a, quote, therapist is, okay, but don't focus on them. You've got to let go, right? Well, that's a fallacy. In real life, that isn't what happens. We don't, you recover to a certain degree, but only because you've been able to speak the truth, which you've never allowed to do, as a quote victim. And even now, the whole emphasis is on, let's do things in the terms of the abuser. So, for example, why aren't they saying, well, the one who did the crime has to answer for it, right? They should be asking us for forgiveness. Why do we have to forgive the thing done to us? And I think that there's in our culture, it goes back to the whole biblical message that, God was this all-powerful master. Adam and Eve rebelled against God, and so were punished because they went against the authority figure. And it's interesting, they always scapegoat this serpent as, as the one who is responsible. When you look at the whole language in that Genesis passage, God says, okay, I'm going to give you a mind, but you can't eat from the tree of knowledge, which seems a bit odd. It's kind of like this arbitrary order from God, right? And the serpent says, and don't forget, the serpent in the Middle East was traditionally a symbol of wisdom and beauty. And he said, no, if you eat from the tree of knowledge, you'll become like God. You'll be self-aware, right? Well, what's wrong with that? But we're taught at a young age they shouldn't have rebelled, and they were punished. And now women suffer in childbirth pain because we rebelled against God. So there's this wired-in sense that you have to obey authority, or you're a bad person. You have to forgive, or you're somehow tainted. And that's the first thing we got to set aside in real recovery. Saying, let's look at the whole picture here, and if at all possible, hold these people accountable. The problem is you can't hold them accountable when they're still running the system. As we found time and again with the whole campaign to expose genocide. So that's kind of in general the message of the article. And it's funny when we use this, and it's based on kind of things that we would talk about in our healing circles, in the talking circles, and this is drawn from people's own observations. When they would say, yeah, I don't, we're always told that we've got to have reconciliation. And that's another really interesting word, because you hear it all the time, right? Without really understanding what it means. There are a lot of words in English like that. We think we know what the meaning is, but in fact, it means something directly opposite. Apology is another one. So let me just talk about those two words for a minute, because they're very, very instructive, unless you had a question or anything.
No, go ahead. Let's go on this train of thought.
Apology, we think, means I'm really sorry, let's make up, let's make things better. And in everyday life, okay, maybe that's how it's used. But if you look it up in Webster's dictionary, it doesn't talk about that at all. It says an apologia is to defend an action. It's to say I'm justified, to say I didn't do anything wrong. Right? An apologetic is you're writing a defense of something. So in fact, an apology means, when you notice politicians will do this, or church leaders, they'll say, we issue an apology. They don't ever say, I'm sorry. They say, I issue an apology. Because under the law, what that means is we didn't do anything wrong. We're indemnifying ourselves legally, and things will carry on as they are. So in fact, it's a way to get perpetrators off the hook, that use of that word. And yet everyone's thinking, oh, they're sorry. Isn't that nice? Now things are going to be better, right? And the corollary to that, the second word, is reconciliation. Now, it's such an interesting thing, the way words are turned around. It comes from a Latin word, a concilia. When you're conciliating, in ancient Rome, when a tribal leader would rebel against Rome, they would be brought in chains into the forum in Rome and kneel down in front of the emperor and beg forgiveness from the emperor for having rebelled. And then they'd strangle him to death. He'd be ritually strangled to death in front of the emperor. That was called being reconciled. And there's notes in the Inquisition in the Middle Ages saying so-and-so was reconciled to the church by loss of property, by 10 years in jail. And so and it's still in our language, the expression, he's reconciled to his fate. It means surrender. Reconciliation is an act of surrender, and it's resubordinating people. So in Canada, they're going on about reconciliation all the time. It's exactly what happened. The Native people were given a bit of money, and in return, they wouldn't sue the perpetrator, and they said they didn't do anything wrong. Here, we're reconciled. We're re-enslaved, right? And so reconciliation means the opposite in practice of what we all think it means, right? So we should talk in terms of justice and on the terms of the people who've been harmed, not in the terms of the abusers in power and the others who are continuing to inflict these crimes on the innocent.
How would you personally define forgiveness with this definition, in a sense of how to apply it?
Well, I would use it the way that when it's used, for example, on the lips of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And he's talking in the passage in the Beatitudes, where he's talking about loving your enemy and forgiving, okay? it's really interesting because the Greek word because Hebrew is the language of the Old Testament, Greek, the New Testament. And in the Greek, the word he uses actually means to turn around and walk in a different direction. It doesn't mean buddy up to the one who harmed you, right? It doesn't mean ignore everything that happened and pretend you've got a new life when you're still bearing the scars. It means don't be like your enemy. Turn around and walk in a different way. Your best recovery is when you're not like the person who did that to you. And that to me is what forgiveness is. Like, I don't feel the need. I'll give you an example. The men who destroyed my life, who paid my wife to leave me, who made sure I lost my children in divorce court, who have made my life hell for decades, blocked employment, incited people in violence against me and my friends, all of this stuff, who continue to tell lies about the residential school genocide. They helped me, because if I hadn't have gone through that suffering, I wouldn't be right here right now talking to you, right? It was necessary, and that's kind of the importance of pain, because it's a great teacher. It allows us to grow beyond ourselves once we understand it and have lost our fear of it. So in a way, those quote enemies help me, and I feel no need to carry a personal grudge against them, because striking back at them, they're puppets in a way. They're a manifestation of this deeper crime, that needed me silenced, right? So they're not the problem any more than Epstein is the problem. He's as much of a victim when you know that these perpetrators are pathetic figures, and so it's not about getting angry at them. It's about recognizing that we can't be like them anymore. We've got to retain our integrity and who we are prior to the harm that was done to us. I will not, Martin Luther King had this saying, don't ever let a man make you hate him so much that you have to get down in the ditch there with him to fight him, right? Because you're the one who loses if you strike back on their terms. We have to strike back on our terms, which is hold on to the truth and say we're not going to be part of your system anymore that does this to people. And so I don't know if that answered your question, but that's what kind of came to mind about the moral power of not striking back, and yet standing firm on your truth and what you know is true, right?
From your own experiences and from the perspective of survivors who are told that through therapists and through healers, through their own personal beliefs potentially, that the only way to move forward is to forgive, what's a alternative or a healthier way, do you think, to flow through the pain process? What should somebody be focused on instead at the end to know that they're getting through, versus having forgiveness be the final line that they're supposed to cross?
Yeah, like unilateral forgiveness is kind of silly when you think about it, when the crime is still happening. Because don't forget, if you've been harmed and abused, usually the person gets away with it. They're not held to be accountable. They keep doing it to other children. And in that situation, to give them unilateral forgiveness, like, I know you're still harming kids, but I'm not going to hold it against you. That makes you an accomplice in a way. It makes you an accomplice in allowing them to continue the crime. So the first thing is, and you know this when you're being harmed, I don't want to be complicit anymore, because we all to some degree contributed to what happened to us. We weren't just kind of helpless victims. We colluded to varying degrees. Maybe as a child we didn't think we had an alternative, but we still colluded, and we didn't talk about it. We didn't fight back, and so that made us an accomplice. And part of the healing process is recognizing that you don't have to blame yourself and rip yourself apart, because that's what they want. They want you to be the one who feels guilty and ashamed and I'm sorry, So while they're still doing this, forgiveness is irrelevant. We have to stop this from happening. And think of your own word. And it's funny, in the healing circles, one of the first things we discovered is that the people who have been very badly harmed, we're all using the same language of the system. They said, I was abused. And I said, well, that's a pretty mild word. What happened to you? And they wouldn't say it. And finally, they would say, okay, I had my teeth pulled out without painkiller, or I was anally raped, or I saw a kid get beaten to death. I said, okay, that's concrete, tortured, all of these crimes. Those are your words. Find your language, because we automatically open our mouth and the voice of the oppressor comes out, because that's what we're being taught, to speak in their language, and we need our own language, and that's really an important part of that healing process of saying what happened in your own words, right? And that's the first step, really, in reclaiming what happened to you, right?
How do you feel about forgiveness to self if there were things that somebody feels guilty for complying with or not pushing back? Or even a lot of survivors are forced to do things that later, and again, it's not their fault because they were forced to do it by an abuser. However, that guilt is still there for doing it and having to participate in it and carrying the memory and reliving it. Do you think forgiveness of self is something important, or is there a different way that you look at that also?
I think honesty with self is the most important, because don't forget, we always have choice, even as a child. And the children who said no might have been killed, or they might have been so brutalized that they can't talk about it anymore. But a victim mentality is to think, I had no choice. It was done to me. I'm a passive victim. That's not taking responsibility for who we are and what happened. It's like one of the difficulties in working with Ninth Circle survivors is just they had to take part, not have to, change the language. They took part in the torture and the killing of other children. Toast Niehaus and others describe that all the time. And they have that guilt and shame and blood on their hands. And I remember the first time Toast told me that, I said, how do you deal with it? She said, I don't. I'll live with that till the day I die. But I'm telling the truth. And I think it's to some way makes up for that, the fact that I'm able to name it. Because when I'm silent about it, I'm continuing to do that crime. That's the way she put it, right? So I don't know. I don't know if there's a language yet for that. People have to come up with that themselves. What best describes our situation means, yeah, we all are complicit. I mean, all of us in the world are taking part in this. And that's when the first step in true self-governance is to own our piece of the crime, right? And not just say we're just victims, which is never the case. So, yeah, I think it's about the maturity of taking responsibility for ourselves, and then you can change. Because when you're in denial about your own role, it's always somebody else who's the problem. There's always some other enemy. And just like there's some savior who's going to come in and fix it all, right? It's the way children who are caught like this continue to dwell. They haven't moved beyond it. Now, understandably, in some ways, the level of fear is so huge that people don't know what the alternative is to being immobilized in that fear, especially when you look at the state of the world, and what happens all around us. But you need people to set the example. And this classic example is the day we were at that protest in that church that we occupied in Vancouver, and most of the people who were in our crowd were Native people, and they were terrified. They didn't want to walk into that church. So I let them. I just said, "Come on, let's go," and I walked in, and then they all followed, right? And somebody had to break the ice to say, "Look, I'm not afraid of these people, and you shouldn't be either." Right? And it worked because somebody had broken the ice, and we all have to play that role in whatever situation we find it. So we're not afraid. We have nothing to be afraid of, or even ashamed of, right? Because there's no experience that happens to us that can break our soul, because we're part of an eternal, that eternity that nobody can corrupt. Right. And it's finding that place within ourselves that's untouched. And I think that's real. If you want to talk about forgiving yourself, that's one of the ways you find it. You find that purity, of a child within yourself again, that innocence. And, I remember as a little kid walking around and I don't know what your experience was as a child, but I was just loving everybody. I looked at everybody with complete innocence and trust. And, we all carry that still, despite our scars and our world weariness. And it's finding that innocent within ourselves and saying, okay, I'm going to protect you now. I'm not going to let anything harm you. That's one of the steps towards moving past that victimhood, right?
How would you perceive an instance regarding forgiveness or not forgiving if an abuser wants to repent to one of their victims and comes to that conclusion that, yes, I did. I'm going to take responsibility for what I did. I'm going to heal from it. I don't want to be this person anymore. In that case, is forgiveness appropriate, or should there still be sort of that righteous anger in a sense of somebody not wanting to necessarily give that to the person?
That's a really good question. I don't know many such incidents because usually perpetrators don't do that. They feel they don't have to. I mean, the policy in the Catholic Church that every perpetrator is automatically protected. The police are never told. Why would they change? They don't have to. Like, people only change when they have to, and then it's usually to get back to some status quo that they don't want to lose. There are people, although I've met one or two, who are like that, and whose conscience, like a soldier in war, they suspend their conscience to kill, right? To kill or be killed. And then the effect hits them after, right? Some people are more capable of doing that than others. So I think it depends on the situation, but being able to do, and I've done this with people who've harmed me, I continue to show them love, right? And try to understand. I had a guy, one of the ministers of the United Church, come out once and physically assault me because he was so angry that I was talking about the church's dirty laundry. He was a former moderator of the United Church, actually, Gary Patterson, and he was so outraged with me. And I looked him right in the eye and I said, think of what you did to those generations of children, and what did you do to my children? Help take them from me. Think about that, Gary. And I saw in his eyes fear. He was terrified, and he ran back into his church in his robes, right? And I think if you're, one way to put it is you're a guy, my friend in India, Shiva Shankar, said, you have to be the Buddha of compassion with the ones who have harmed you. And that will bring out that in them. That's the only thing that will bring it out of them. If you embody that Christ-like, and I don't mean like putting yourself up on a pedestal, hi, I'm Jesus Christ. No, that capacity is within all of us, right? That to show that love is stronger than anything that the world can do to us, right? So, I mean, I think that works.
How should we hold space for people who do declare, I will never forgive this person? I think it's a natural reaction. A lot of people do respond with, no, you need to forgive them, or you need to come to peace with what happened, because otherwise you're going to be attached to them with grief, and you're going to have that string attached, that burden, you're not letting it go. How should we approach that instead when and if we do hear somebody that has the same perspective that forgiveness is not the way that they want to go and they're choosing not to?
Well, no one can really tell another one what their emotional reaction should be. And the effect of somebody, and this is unfortunate, you get this from religious people a lot. They feel the need to say, you shouldn't do this, you've got to do this. This is how you need to think. This should be your reaction. And especially about something like forgiveness.
And even in therapy, like how you were saying, it's sort of a
thing a
lot.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you think, well, who benefits? It's like any question. Who benefits from a certain attitude? Who benefits from forgiveness? The perpetrator. Because then they won't get ratted on and they get to get away with it and do it again, right? If they're going to do that crime in the first place, that's how they think. They think in terms of self-preservation, and I don't have to be exposed. Thank you for forgiving me. Now I'm free to do it. That's often the case. So it doesn't help somebody who's been harmed to forgive in a very material sense. It doesn't help them at all. Because do you actually feel better, and are you a better person by forgiving? Show me the evidence, because I see the opposite, like I said, all the time. I can within myself not hate them, not get caught up in having to just hate these people. We all go through that phase when some horrible thing has happened to us. We want to strike back. It's actually a normal human response, just like fear is part of our defense mechanism. The need to defend yourself is an inherent human right. We have the right to defend ourselves in every way. And part of that self-defense is anger. righteous anger that this is wrong, what's happened. And, so the day I die, I'm going to have that same passion. It was wrong that what happened to me and my family and my children and all those other children. I'm never going to lose that. Does that mean I'm not forgiving? No, it means that I'm not forgetting, right? And I'm not allowing the fog. And this always happens, as you know, they bring in the fog and hide all the crime, and then it happens again tomorrow. How do we break that? Why? Well, we become the force for change by saying, no, we're not forgetting. I feel no need to forgive until they change. Right?
Yeah, 100%. I think these things that we tend to rattle off, and like you said, that we hear in therapy, it's such a natural thing for people to be rooted in, that's the solution. And I love too how you brought up biblical examples of maybe how we're not looking at the truth of the matter and what's rooted biblically. Are there other biblical examples of this that you found that could help validate this?
Yeah, it's interesting in the book of Job. It's such a strange book because it's like Satan and God experimenting with Job, right? Here's Job, this acting perfectly. He's a righteous man. He does good. He loves his family. And God's boasting about him, saying to Satan, look at what a great righteous man Job is. And Satan says, oh yeah? Well, that's just, he's got it so good. Take it all away and let's see if he's still so righteous. So, okay, let's experiment on Job here. And as you know, he loses his children, his livelihood. He becomes impoverished. His family's gone. He's struck by disease. And he never collapses because he keeps asking the same question over. Why are you doing this to me? I didn't do anything wrong. And that right there is the most basic human dilemma. Everyone on the planet always asks that at some point. Why is this happening to me? I didn't do anything wrong. He's looking for a moral arbiter somewhere to say, okay, the good are rewarded and the bad are punished. No, it's the opposite. Usually, that for doing good, you're usually punished. Especially when the bad guys are in charge. And for doing bad, you prosper in this world. For being ruthless, and if you're ruthless enough, you get to become president of the United States. And so in that world, what does morality? What weight does morality have? And it's such an interesting book because at the end, Job never surrenders. He never gives up. God pulls a power play at the end saying, how dare you question me? I'm the master of the universe, la, 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 la. Because God's backed into the corner by Job. Yeah, because Job, he can't answer Job's question. Because he doesn't want to say, well, I was just experimenting with you, Job. Like maybe life is just some experiment by these divine forces. So God didn't, or put it this way, Job, the human being, the mortal, proved superior to God. He was more of a moral being than God was. He challenged God, right? And so that's the dilemma we face. If you're going to stand on who you are to the very end, you're taking on the whole universe. You're taking on everything, because the universe doesn't make any moral sense. It doesn't half the time, right? We have to create our own morality. And that's what Job did. I'm going to stand by what I know is right to the very end. And then even God has to say, okay, you're right. But, I think that's the meaning of holding on to who we are, right? And not surrendering in the face of, reconcile with your enemy and believe all the lies of the system, that if you pay your taxes and work, you're going to be rewarded in the end. All of these lies whereby a few rule the many, right? So it's like in my book, you bring together all three sovereignties, personal, political, spiritual, and then you're a true human being in the Anishinaabe culture, central Canada, that adopted me, gave me the name Strong Boys. Their name for themselves is Anishinaabe, which means a true human being, which anyone can be. It isn't just their culture. Anyone can be a true human being by owning themselves and not being owned by something or someone else.
In your own journey, did this rejection to forgiveness come naturally to you, or what was your process in eventually getting there where you could have righteous anger and realize maybe it's an abuse tactic to ask you to forgive when you are the one being abused? How did you process that in your own mind?
It was hard because I was getting ripped apart on so many levels, right?
Yeah.
It was so overwhelming. It's like, by an analogy, if you're in a foxhole and you're being overrun by other troops, you don't have time to hate them or to, you're just trying to survive here, right? How do you survive? And I was in that foxhole for a number of years, but what began to piece it together for me was A, I stood on what I knew was right. B, I had to be there for my children and the other children and the other people who had been brought to me, and this is how our movement began to build. So I didn't worry about personally forgiving, because I said it's important to document what these people did and why they felt the need to destroy my life. There's a bigger crime. I didn't get caught up in my own pain. I didn't say, like, poor me, publish all this stuff about, look what they've done to poor Kevin Annett. No, I knew instinctively you got to talk about what was causing it. Why are they doing this to me? Look at the bigger crime. And that's what changed things. That's what forced out the truth of this. I forgot about my personal pain and self and focused on this bigger fact. And forgiveness, I mean, I didn't have time for resentment in a way. Like it was too, there was too much at stake. It was life and death. And that's why, an important principle is that when you're doing something because your life depends on it, things are very clear. You know exactly what's needed. But if I just come in the do-gooder and I'm doing something out of a good intention, it doesn't mean a lot. You have to, like Sun Tzu says in The Art of War, you have to engage with an enemy to really understand who they are. You have to fight them. And then you'll see. And so, classic example of this, when I was thrown out as a minister, they had this kangaroo court. And I couldn't see the evidence against me. I couldn't see who charged me. I couldn't be judged by my peers. Now, all of those things are necessary in a court of law. But it was this kangaroo court. They threw me out without any due process. And then we write to the Attorney General, British Columbia, and he says, well, they have the right to do that. They're the church. So right there, churches have power unto itself, and the government allows them to do it. I mean, isn't that the encapsulation of what the problem was? That's how the genocide happened. So what was happening in my life was a mirror of what had happened to 60,000 or more children. Yeah, and what happens every day. Yeah, church can kill children and get away with it. They're a law unto themselves. The system was telling me that, and I was experiencing that every day of my life, like I still do, right? So that's why when people often say, well, you're biased because they went after you. No, when they go after you personally, that's when you get clear about who it is we're fighting, because otherwise it's all abstract. I mean, everyone has their own theory about what the problem is, but I always say, well, how has it impacted you personally, right? Have you actually been affected by it, or is it just an idea in your mind, right?
Talk about natural law and forgiveness. We've talked a little bit about more of the spiritual side and how biblically and even in the church, it can either be inverted, or we can look at it in a different way and see the reverse of it as exactly what you're saying. But is forgiveness comply with natural law, or does it go against natural law?
Well, natural law is kind of the inherent way that people act with each other based on universal principles. So, for example, like in our common law training manual, we say there's 3 axioms or things in the universe that are true, and that is everything exists for the mutual support of everything else. That's true in physics, that's biology, ecosystems, human beings. The way that principle works out is, okay, no one has any natural authority over anyone else. The only way you get authority is through a covenant, right? That was the idea of America. We're going to covenant, form a government, but we govern ourselves with our own laws. There isn't some power over us. Nobody has a right to grab more of the earth than anybody else. That's crazy. It'll lead to chaos and poverty and war, right? And we're to live together in harmony and take care of Mother Earth. I mean, these are like basic things that everyone knows in their gut is true, right? So where forgiveness comes into that. Well, if you're living according to those principles, you don't really need forgiveness because people are cooperating and helping each other. And there isn't, ideally, human nature will change enough so that we're not harming each other, right? That we're, and so, I don't know, I think you go back to square one and say, in a society like ours that there's so little gentleness and love manifested. You can manifest it as a personal relationship with someone, but you can't manifest it socially. Because imagine America living with its economy and politics running according to love and not power. Yeah, that's mind-boggling, right? But unless we do that, you're going to have people harming each other, and then so in a way you can circumvent the whole issue of forgiveness by just living justly and according to our nature, which is not to destroy each other, right?
Yeah. For therapists maybe listening who are seeing a different perspective of this, do you have alternatives in a sense of how somebody can therapeutically help somebody through how they're processing forgiveness and maybe a different way that they could approach survivors who are going through a hard time and maybe are grappling with that?
Well, in a way it's hard because I don't share the same frame of reference as a therapist.
Sure.
In that I'm coming from a more kind of universal model rather than, like, a therapeutic model is based on the idea that the problem lies with an individual. And, like, for example, when I used to work on the west coast of Vancouver Island, there's a native healing center there called Kakawis, and it's for drug and alcohol rehab. They never bring in individuals; they bring in whole families. Okay, because the problem is a systemic one. It isn't about this is a person who needs help. When William Coombs occupied that church with us, he stopped drinking, and he said, "I went to therapy for 20 years and never did anything." Because there was always, the assumption is that there's something wrong with you, which is what the missionaries always said, right? Oh, you lack Christ. Here, we're bringing it to you. That's what you're told now by the system. You're a problem. They forget that we're born complete. We're complete human beings when we're born. We don't need anything put into us, right? We have an inherent sense of justice and recovery. We just need to be allowed to recover by getting this stuff off us. So the idea of going in and getting therapy from an individual is absurd. It doesn't get to the heart. It treats you like, which is what an abuser wants. They want to say, "Oh yeah, they've got the problem, not me." How often is the abuser brought in and forced to go through therapy, right? Well, politically, of course, they're not, because of all their connections and how it's the system that's being abusive and all this stuff, right? So, yeah, so I mean, we got to get away from that whole model of fixing individuals, which is a sign of the sickness itself.
Now, we're talking about a lot of this on an individual level of how repression, how the perception of forgiveness, the repression of actual truth, maybe buried underneath the act of forgiveness unknowingly, can affect somebody, and sort of the opposite of that, which is what we've been talking about, the act of expression of truth, of honesty. How is this affecting us on sort of a global, national, cultural level? Because if this is something that's been so deeply ingrained, not just in Western society, but really this is sort of a global phenomenon, that forgiveness is perpetuated on such a big level. How is this affecting us culturally and societally?
Well, I mean, it's hard to talk about a global culture in a way. I know it seems that way, that we're because of the technology, that we're a global system, but we're not really. We individuals and cultures are each very different, and we're expected to conform to this imperial model. That there's one way of viewing things, one world religion, one world government. I mean, it's always that movement inwards, and the leveling out of all difference. That's the way machines operate, right? Human beings are far more diverse and unpredictable than that, and we should be encouraging that diversity all the time, right? But all these forces work against that, and it creates, as I think, I'm not one to quote Sigmund Freud very much, but there is one thing he said which I agree, and that is, to live in a society, even in a group larger than 100 or 200 people, you have to suppress a number of natural instincts, right? And to do that creates an inherent neurosis in people, in that you're going against what you want to do all the time, right? And with enough social pressure, then neurosis can become full-blown psychosis, where you become totally detached from not only yourself, but reality. And that it's fed by the technology now, where people can retreat into a little cyber world and they become even more detached. And so what can we even know what we're in? Like I find, especially the present generation is so detached from reality. How do you begin to talk to people without them looking for something on the internet to confirm if it's true or not? And I said, well, truth doesn't lie here, it lies here, and from your own experience. But they're taught to degrade and ignore their own experience. So it's hard to know where to begin in this kind of madhouse we're in, right? Except to get out of the madhouse to the extent that we can, right? And that's why we say, get the children out of the cities, get them on the land, get them back into natural relationships, with Mother Earth, who is our real healer. And, then we'll begin to see change, but it's hard within the box to talk about that.
Do you think that this leads to inaction with people when they replace the natural emotions that they have, such as anger or wanting to do something, to, even if it is from a perspective of like retaliation or justice, wanting to express and take action on that? Do you think the repression of those emotions that people feel guilty for feeling and covering it up with something like forgiveness or positivity, do you think that makes people not want to, whether it's an individual that's been abused or society who's sort of adapting these ideals as well? Do you think that's preventing people from taking action because they're burying the emotions that could fuel change potentially?
Well, from the point of view of the one who's doing the harm, that's exactly the purpose of forgiveness, to create that in people. But it does a lot more than that. It damages us. If we're not able to act on what we know is right, and if you're forced to live alongside the fact that, look at what they did to my life and they got away with it, and you can't do anything about that, it destroys you. It's an acid on your soul. That's why I knew for my own survival, I had to get involved in this campaign, so I could take that outrage about what they did to me for no reason other than I was exposing their dirty laundry that they had to admit to eventually anyway. I had to take that rage and put it externally, because they're always hoping that somebody who is in my situation kills himself in grief. And in fact, the suicide rate among fathers who have lost their children in British Columbia is 40 times the national average. And then just pull the plug because they can't deal with the grief, of losing their kids. They were hoping that I'd do that, but I did the opposite. And so that was my way of dealing with them. But unless we have an outlet for the wrong that's being done against us, it'll destroy us, because it goes against, it's like the rape of a child. It's a violation of the most basic human reality, the protection of our young and the defense of innocence. Why people, and it's still a mystery to me, Emma, people can hear about all this stuff and know that's happening to children and yet do nothing about it. What are they doing to themselves by doing that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it brings me back to when I started this podcast. My natural reaction wasn't forgiveness. I was mad that I learned of all of this, and I felt so contained within myself, just keeping this knowledge that I had within me. I had no way to express it, and I felt angry all the time. And so I ended up figuring out, okay, well, what can I do about it? And I wanted to sort of get your advice on that for people who feel, because obviously anger, we can have it, but it doesn't feel good if we're always carrying it. So how did you cope with those feelings, and what guidance would you give to other people who have them and they're not suppressing it, but they just feel angry all the time and they don't know what to do about it?
Well, like I say, there's got to be a channel for it, but it's got to be on your terms. For example, I knew a woman who, when she got involved in our protest, she took a rock and chucked it through a stained glass window of a church, right? And other people have burned churches down. Like, there were a number of churches that have been burned down across Canada. And of course, everyone's saying, oh, it's horrible, they damage property. And then I said to the reporter who asked me about that, I said, why is it a crime? And I wrote an article entitled this, why is it a crime to burn churches that burn children? Okay, so what's more important, the child's life or your property? All the time, they're showing what's more important to them, right? But those are legitimate responses, right? And we shouldn't feel bad about them. That's not to incite people to, quote, break the law. But you have to ask, well, then why is the law protecting the building and not the life of the child, right? Why they're protecting the perpetrators and not the ones who they're harming? All of that is raising big question and should get people angry. But the anger needs to break them out of their complicity and the system. And the only way to do that is to create something different, which is why we're trying to do that on many levels. Say, okay, got to leave the old world here, folks, and go to the new one. And that's an exciting process. That means it's in our hands now what we do. We're not waiting for a savior. We're not waiting for the bad guy to, become good and say, I'm sorry, we're doing it ourselves now. That's the whole point.
How did you manage your own righteous anger and strong emotions because you weren't bearing them? How did you find ways to be productive with it that weren't violent, or I should say maybe damaging or get you in trouble? And what guidance would you have for people to manage that when they decide that they want to do something with it?
Well, I don't mind getting in trouble because there's a term, who was it? John Wesley, I think, the early Methodist. He got arrested all the time because he would, tell people to leave the churches and return to Christ and all that. And he had an expression, stirring up God's good trouble. Right. And it's like, causing trouble. Read the Bible. What did Jesus do? He got nailed up for trashing. I remember somebody once said to me, well, Reverend, I don't come to church much. And I say, that's okay. Jesus only went to church once, and that was to trash the place when he cleansed the temple. Right. So, there's no bigger hater of organized religion than Jesus Christ. Right. And again, we're conditioned that these words like hate is somehow bad. Right. Because we equate it with, somebody burning a cross and lynching somebody. But no, these are normal human reactions and we own them. But then we say, okay, since we know attacking individuals is not the point, you got to bring down this thing that's causing everyone to act this way. And what are the ties mentally and emotionally people have with this murderous system that we're all in, right? And that's how you break it down, I think.
Do you think that for people, cause like you said, there's nothing we don't want people to get in trouble to the point where it completely destroys their life. However, trouble could be looked at, it's sort of a backwards word for rebellion in a sense of doing something right. Like you said, standing up for something that's not, good. There's nothing wrong with putting your foot down and saying, this is bad and I'm going to stand up for it, and according to law, man's law versus nature's law, there's different requirements for that. Do you think for people to make change, it would be beneficial for them to find like-minded people who have that same perspective, do something together as a united front that could quote unquote be troubling or cause trouble?
Well, it used to be causing trouble in America to hide runaway slaves. It used to be causing trouble to give women the vote. Any change that attacks the status quo is always going to cause trouble. It's always going to cause violence and arrests and disruption. Martin Luther King said that all the time. He said, we want to disrupt the system. That's what civil disobedience does. It stops the system. It brings it to a halt to expose its evil. And we allow our heads to get broken. We allow ourselves to get beaten up, to take the violence of the enemy, to show that there is no enemy except the hatred itself, and a system that keeps one group down, one group over another. And you have to be willing to put your own body on the line for that. And so putting our bodies on the line together, there's no more beautiful and empowering thing than to do that. To be arrested together, to just say, no, we're not doing this. And you've got to find those like-minded people, but you often find it just in action, in doing it. I've met the best people in the course of those actions, not by doing conversations, phone calls or interviews or anything. It helps. But once you're connected, you got to think, how can I, and they used to say this in the anti-war movement all the time. and the Berkeley Free Speech Movement. They said, the machine is odious. We've got to bring the machine to a halt. How can we best do that? How can we put something that's going to shut the machine down, right? And, that's all the time the challenge of how you do that. And it can be very creative and fun and beautiful and life-giving, when you start doing that.
I love the side of Kevin. Kevin's like, get in trouble, you guys. Let's go out and cause some chaos out in society. I love it.
Well, I mean, the chaos is already there. It's organized chaos happening now. The question is, how do you hold on to your moral integrity and say no? Like, our no right now is more important than our yes, right? Because the yes can't happen unless you say no first. Right?
Absolutely. That's a good point. And sort of along these same lines, speaking of high emotions and taking action, with these new Epstein files that have come out, I think everybody's just been wanting it, but they didn't expect that all this would just drop. And there's a lot of people for the first time just getting slapped in the face with this information. They go from thinking the world is great, politicians are here to help us. What's the worst that could be out there? All of a sudden, politicians eating babies, satanic rituals. The worst of the worst is just slapping people in the face. And it's destabilizing a lot of people, including survivors who have always wanted to be seen, but all of a sudden they are seen, and it goes against all their programming. It goes against everything that their abusers ever wanted. And now they feel so exposed in a sense as well, and are going through a lot of destabilization. You've dealt with a lot of going through reveals and being hit with really hard information when you weren't necessarily understanding the sort of rabbit hole that you were going down. You knew things were bad, but you got hit with a lot of information that you weren't expecting either, and navigated that. How can we as a society navigate through this in a healthy way instead of letting it make us fearful and complacent and just overall traumatized?
Yeah, and in a way, it's kind of like watching 9/11 happen again, because they're hitting people with so much. It's not accidental. The net effect is people are emotionally numbed to it, and it's a way to inoculate people, so that we don't want to hear about this stuff anymore about murdered children. Just don't ever mention that to me ever again. Well, fine, then issue is shut down, right? But nevertheless, despite all that, it's an incredible opportunity, because for survivors especially, because they can say, you see, I'm not crazy. You see, there's more proof. Even the system is admitting it happens, right? And so they should feel empowered and safer now. The fact that more people know, because I'm alive because I took the information I had and immediately published it. I got it out there immediately, and and that's a good protection for you, to be able to see that the truth is on our side. And they've lost all credibility, these so-called rulers, right? And when a system loses its legitimacy, it always falls. That's what happens before a revolution. Everyone knows it's got to be chucked. The question is, what are you going to replace it with? That's what we're working overtime on, to try to set that up before things get a lot worse and more repression comes down. So anyway, that's important.
How do we make sense of all this? You said that this is deliberate, that the agenda part of it is to traumatize us, that it wasn't just an accident, that they just released all of this. What are some of the different layers that you found in this exposure that can help people stay grounded and see it for what it is, instead of living in their emotions and sort of reacting to it in that way?
Layers in what sense? You mean...
What do you think is the purpose behind them doing this? Obviously, it's exposing things, so people now know that the stuff is real. But we know that the government, they're not just telling on themselves. They haven't even made a single arrest. So it's not something where they're like, we're going to bring justice. Why do you think they did this? So people can make sense of it and start wrapping their mind around the bigger picture of all of it.
Well, for thousands of years, people in power have used a simple technique, random violence. They have a monopoly on the violence, and they have to show routinely that we can kill anybody we like, and we're going to get away with it, right? They've done that in spades in Canada with the residential school massacre. Right? Look what we did. Now we're patting ourselves on the back, and we're still holding our church services. And see, so what that does is that tends to demoralize all the people on the bottom. What can you do in the face of that, right? But there's a whole... they can just do this so often when the system itself is teetering, which it is. Like we could have a shooting war up here very soon over the oil and gas between China and America. And it's very destabilized, the whole global political economy now. And so in a way, we always assume that the people in charge know what they're doing. But in fact, what you tend to find in a hierarchical society like ours is that the further you go up to the top, the crazier you become, literally. You become more dissociated from who you are as a human being in order to function like that, right? And so the great book by an American historian, Barbara Tuchman, she wrote a book about just before World War I, all the decisions the European powers were making, and they were increasingly self-destructive. It's like they wanted to destroy themselves, right? And that's what happened in Russia, in Austria-Hungary, and Germany. All the imperial systems fell to revolutions, and they were making decisions to destroy themselves. It didn't make any sense. Like now, Trump and all these other guys are self-destructing. And so we should not worry so much about what they're doing. The sanity exists at the bottom among us. We're the ones who are most sane because we're not tied into the systems of power. So we got to turn off all this preoccupation with these people and just turn it on towards each other now. And what are we going to create? How do you have to hold on to your own virtue and try to live that in a way that's outside their system altogether, because it has no future. That's the point.
Do you feel too that this is a funnel to the New World Order that you were talking about earlier with the one world government, one world religion? Do you think part of this is they want us to turn against authority and start not only fighting each other, but giving them the leverage to come in with a solution and say, oh, you're so mad at government? You're right. Look at what they're doing. Let's give you a solution. Let's come in. We're going to take away your governments. We're going to give you guys one leader for the whole world, and we're just going to abolish the whole system. Do you feel that could be a possibility with this as well?
I'm sure some bright boy in a think tank is thinking that, that might work. But the point is, they don't have the power to do any of that. Like, the system in the world is so much richer and more complex than their systems, that we think are real, can encompass. No system has the power to do all that. Look at how the way the economy runs. Do people in these different corporations cooperate? No, they're out to cut each other's jugulars. Okay, so how can in that system you have one ruler running it all? It doesn't make sense on the ground, and we all know that. But we're stuck in the bubble of their head. We got to create our own thoughts, and then the illusions fall away. The scales fall from our eyes, and we see things as they are. And it's not like it's being depicted at all.
Absolutely, and that's such a good point. I think we forget that there's more choices than the ones that they give us, and we've brought this up on different episodes, but that's really where our liberation and freedom lies, is just not participating. If we all just had this mass exodus of not voting, not paying taxes, not abiding by man's rule, and creating our own communities and sustaining them by creating rules that are conducive naturally for those communities, what could they do about that if we all walked away from it at once? Their reality wouldn't exist anymore. We're the ones who make it real by participating in it. It's in their mind, and they find ways to get our participation to create it, but there's so few of them. If we just walked away from it, the reality that they've created for us would just crumble. It wouldn't exist anymore.
That's right. And those wonderful moments in history when revolutions happen, and you read these accounts of when people take the power back into their own hands. And I remember my friend Larry Gamboni, we were in the anti-war movement together in the 60s and 70s. And he described a moment I remember when we had this big gathering downtown Vancouver, and we had the U.S. consulate surrounded. And this guy behind the door, this U.S. Marine, had locked it. And he was standing there by himself looking terrified. And all of us, we weren't angry. We suddenly were filled with a sense of, look down the street, there's thousands of us. We can change the world, right? That sense of power we have to somehow bring back, and not through, you don't even need a mass protest to get that. You need people with the vision to live it every day of their life and to say, this is my reality now, right? We have new priorities in our life, and we have to live that. The old 9-to-5 existence is gone. Get off the treadmill, people, and imagine. That was a big word in our generation. All power to the imagination. I remember people used to write that on walls and everything. Imagine something very different, very human, very loving and just, and it'll be. But you got to go from thought to action, like steam and a piston. That's how you get movement.
How can people endure this as you have? What guidance would you have for people who are just so exhausted, and even though in their heart they're like, I'm not going to give up, they're just struggling? And even survivors who have come so far in their healing, and all of a sudden they're triggered every time they open social media and feel like progress is going. There's just a lot of people who are on the brink of struggling to have hope, or they've sort of lost it altogether and are having trouble regaining it. How can we get people through this, and what guidance do you have for people struggling?
You got to be stubborn. You got to say, I'm not going to give in to depression. That's what this whole system wants, And also, I don't think it's about, like, people say, well, how come you're so brave? And I said, I'm not brave all the time. Bravery is about stubbornness. It's about selflessness too. It's when you live a selfish existence, you're going to be afraid all the time. What might I lose, right? But if you're living a selfless life for others, you don't worry about that. You think about, what do I need to do next to help this person to do this, or stop them from doing this to who, and that's why if you lived and I had the advantage of having been like that since I was a teenager, right? So I was already living that, and I learned to get stronger from my own suffering and pain, right? But people have to make a choice. Are you going to try to live for yourself, and everything revolves around you, or are you going to reverse that and start living for others? And that's the essence of love in action when you do that. Right?
Great advice. And regarding all of these topics today, whether it's your own personal endeavors that you're working on behind the scenes, Epstein files, forgiveness, endurance, do you have anything else that you wanted to add to the conversation today that we didn't get to talk about?
Oh, there's lots, but this is good. I mean, I really like the way we go deep in our conversations, and it's good. I would just say it'd be great to meet all of you watching, and hope that we can connect when I'm in the States and going further afield. I'm actually going from there over to Europe to work with the folks over there with the New Republic in England and other places. You see, our movement is spreading all over the world now. It's this 100th monkey effect that's happening. And so I just say to everyone, reach out. Everyone who's listening and watching this is responsible for what happens next. And you're all important. You're all needed. So go from observation to action, and you'll see miracles happen. And I know that for a fact.
And speaking of contacting you, if people would like to connect regarding your tour, you have other ways that you're online as well, and ways that people can support your work. Can you talk about your websites and talk about your documentary, and just share how people can connect with you and support you?
Yeah, murderbydecree.com. And you can see a lot of my books there. They're all listed at Amazon under my name. And Angelfire101 at protonmail.com. And also, I often do this. I think I've done this before. My phone number, 289-680-8724. Call anytime.
That's awesome, Kevin. That's really nice that you give people the opportunity to connect with you. And I definitely encourage people. I think that's really cool that you are coming here, and it's for the people. You're coming to America. You're going to do these different tours, and you really want to be on the ground running with getting people organized and bringing like-minded people together. Do you have any resources or ways, if people wanted to not only connect with you, but if they wanted to set something up, do you have information on your website or anywhere that people can share with others to say, hey, do you want to help with this? This is what we're going to do. Or should people connect with you individually to plan what you might be talking about there and create materials and with your help?
Well, in that regard, one of the things that's good, if you go to my other website, which I didn't mention, about the Republic of Canada, Kanata.org. In there, we have models of how to set up local cell groups and assemblies. how to, do public work, how to start reaching out and creating self-governance where you live. That's a good resource to look at as well. But I think the best is the personal contact. So reaching me personally, and then we can talk on the ground. I've been having some great conversations with people off the Appwood show. I was just talking to somebody who's an insider with the Neuralink. The biotech, bioweapons they want to insert in people's brains. And he's given me all sorts of incredible inside information. So that's come out of these interviews. So I urge people to kind of, reach out to me directly.
And you do a podcast on Sundays.
No, not anymore.
Not anymore? Are you going to be starting that soon?
I don't know yet. I had to go off because I was doing so much traveling that I couldn't sustain it. But hopefully there's enough interest. We'll revive that.
You have your whole archive on the website, though, so people can go on there and listen to all your past episodes.
Yep. Yeah. So, it's the actual website is still up, bbsradio.com/Radio Free Canada. And all our old shows are posted there. Yeah.
I'll have that in the show notes too. And Kevin, it's always great to hear from you. You have such fresh and interesting and very grounded perspectives that I think get swept up in the common narratives that we hear. And I think a lot of people do repress things. They are not living authentic to how they feel. They're not dealing with emotions in ways that they think they are, because it's more kind of burying things. And I think that really does affect us on a cultural level when we're all doing that and stifling ourselves. We're not living an honest, truthful life, and we're not acting that way with each other. And then we're not acting, period, in a way that would be just and fair to those emotions and to the wrongs in the world. So I really appreciate you sharing this. And I really, I enjoy spending time with you. And I'm really grateful that you came on today to give everybody hope in a way that only you can, and to talk about these different perspectives that you've learned and the wisdom that you've gained. You really have endured a lot, and we're all really grateful for you.
Thank you, Emma. I look forward to having this up so we can get more people to watch and get on board.
Absolutely. And so you guys, I'll have all Kevin's information below. I'll have all my information below. Please connect with us, support, go reach out to Kevin if something like that is conducive in your area whenever he comes to America to do his tour. Would love to see some of you guys connect and start some grassroots movements and places and events for him to speak at. And so I'll have his information below, phone number and email included. Connect with him, support him, reach out. And thank you guys so much for listening. Bless you all, and we will see you next time.